This literally just been released. The Tesco figures actually aren't too bad at all. Tesco, of course, is Britain's biggest retailer, and Tesco's chalked up 2 successive quarters of sales growth in the UK, and that's the first time that that's happened in 5 years. I think it's partly a Tesco story. That's because Tesco has been suffering. It's been losing market share to some of the big discounters, particularly Aldi and Lidl, and Tesco are clearly fighting back, trying to compete with the discounters more, and that's obviously good news for consumers. But M&S, they've reported another big fall in sales of both clothing and homewares in the 3 months leading up to Christmas, and that's bad news for one of Britain's best-known retail names. So Tesco's had a good Christmas, but M&S has suffered slightly.
Yeah, look, interesting to hear that. And I suppose, look, I'm no expert, but just extrapolating, I guess, the difference between Tesco and M&S is expensive. You know, Tesco's is quite sort of middle of the price bracket. But for those of us who are trying to save money, you go into M&S and actually a lot of people just simply won't be able to pay those sorts of prices at the current time.
That's exactly right, Isabel. We're seeing the same in food retailing, where, as I say, Aldi and Lidl are doing... they're gaining market share. Tesco and Sainsbury's are still the major players, along with Asda, in British food retailing. But the discounters are gaining ground, as you say, because consumers are voting with their feet. And it is mostly with their feet because we still buy so much of our food over the counter, if you like, and in real life rather than online. But M&S is more of an upmarket brand. It's clear here that retail sales overall are suffering. The headline number earlier this week was that retail sales are up about 6%. And I saw many newspaper headlines saying retail sales are booming, but actually they're not, because once you include into that figure 10% inflation, the volume of retail sales overall falling. And, you know, retail is the engine room of the British economy. So this is what happens when you have inflation, when you have a cost of living squeeze. Consumers' purchasing power is diminished. And so in terms of value, they spend less. And also they look for a bargain. And that's exactly what we're seeing here in these figures this morning from 2 iconic retailers, Britain's biggest retailer, Tesco, and also M&S as well.
Liam, food inflation is a continuing problem, isn't it?
It is, Andrew. Regular inflation is 10.9%. That's just off a 40-year high. That's the figure for November. We'll get the December figure officially out soon. But already we're seeing from the likes of the British Retail Consortium, again, other figures that came out earlier this week, that food inflation is more like 15 to 18%. And that's why we've been saying on GBNews for over a year now, throughout this cost of living squeeze, that for many ordinary folk, households that are, you know, having to work hard to make ends meet, because they disproportionately they spend more of their money as a share on food, on refueling, you know, the car and the van. That's why inflation for less well-off families is much, much higher than that 10% headline number. If you say to lots of families across the UK that the cost of living now is just 10% more than this time last year, that they'll think that's a sick joke, because for them the cost of living is 20, 30% higher. And that's why inflation is such a ghastly thing. And that's why it's politics to the extent it does. It doesn't just cause the industrial strife that we're seeing as workers try and gain ground and keep their wages roughly in line with inflation. It also disproportionately hits the poorest in society. And that's why it's vital inflation comes down. And I do think there are signs of that now. When Rishi Sunak, Andrew, says that inflation's going to halve by the end of the year, I think it's a bit like saying, oh, there's going to be a bit more sun in June than in January due to my policies. I think it's almost an arithmetic inevitability that inflation now is going to start falling, not immediately, but certainly after the spring and into the summer and autumn. So this cost of living squeeze, you know, it's not nice. I don't like to have to report about difficult, nasty things, but I do think that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Liam Halligan, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.